Hi guys, this is the Happy Crow here. We're starting a new segment. This segment is going to be called The Crow's Call, where we talk about a couple different things. And this one is going to be a little bit interesting and definitely going to be a little bit controversial. But before that, I just want to let everyone know we made an announcement on the Facebook page. We did not make an announcement on the website, but we will be starting to move all of our posts from Thursdays to Fridays at 5 p.m. The Facebook page is always going to be a little bit later, but the website will always be updated at 5 p.m. So that's it for the announcements. Let's get into the Crow's Call. Today we're going to be discussing recent events and events in our country mainly. We've had so much, and the one post we touched on a lot of it, but we're going to talk about some very specific things here today. One thing we're going to be talking about is how an innocent man in this situation died. And we're talking about George Floyd. He died, and he did not deserve to die in the way he died. That should never have happened. And it was wrong. And what happened after that was there was a lot of outrage. Very, very, very rightfully so. But unfortunately, we've gone into a whole different direction. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that direction where we went. We have seen a lot of different things happen in this situation. We've seen protests, very good things. We've seen passion for change, very good thing. But the passion has seemed to consume us. It consumed us so much so that there has been senseless violence, there has been anger everywhere. And the passion for change has become so much that we are ready to sacrifice everything and turn the whole system upside down because we want justice. Unfortunately, we've lost what justice actually is. We don't understand what it is because we are just so consumed. Unbridled passion leads to anger and hatred, and that can never bring about good change. Only change that ever works well is through love. And if you want to change something, you can have anger and righteous anger. But as soon as you get into that point where you're past that righteous anger and you're into hatred, now you've crossed the line, and unfortunately your cause is not going to work out very well. Now this discussion is going to bring us to the movement that has currently happened in our country. This movement that has happened has a fantastic concept. The execution is not so good. It doesn't work out very well when you actually look deeply into it. And unfortunately, we're going to talk about today, a lot of people have been tricked by this movement. So here's where it's going to get a little controversial. The Black Lives Matter movement, it started off, if you go back to its roots, it started off with Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was a young man. He was walking down the street, and the narrative was he was killed by just some random white guy because he happened to be walking while black. Unfortunately, that is not the case. There was a person, his name is George Zimmerman. He did kill him, and reality, that situation never had to happen. The situation was definitely unnecessary. What happened was George Zimmerman was a wannabe vigilante, if you want to call that. He went out in the neighborhood he was patrolling for no good reason, and then he stopped this kid, and they got into it, and then the kid started attacking him because I'm sure he was scared at the time. Whatever triggered it, either way, it got to the point where the kid was on top of George Zimmerman. He was just beating him up. And then that's when George Zimmerman drew his weapon and killed him. The whole situation never had to happen to begin with. But according to the law, he was innocent of it. Once again, that should never have happened. It should never have gotten there. But that happened, and then the next one which fueled the movement was Michael Brown. Michael Brown, unfortunately, that whole situation was a very nasty one. That situation was originally marketed, I'm calling it marketed for a reason, as hands up, don't shoot. That never existed. That entire thing never existed. He was definitively going for the officer's gun. He was never shot in the back. But entire movement got entire movement got fueled more because of this. That entire thing was not the correct narrative. Now, sometimes things get started off the wrong foot, but it can evolve into something better. Because, hey, somebody made a mistake, like let's say our country, there's some bad things that happen in the United States to start. But what are we now? We're not too bad. A lot of people want to argue that question, but statistically, you can't argue that. Now, what happened later was with this specific movement, we look at the leadership. You go on their website and you look at the leadership of that website and what they talk about. They're not only talking about justice for Black lives, but they're talking about straight up Marxism, straight up Marxist revolutionizing of how everything in our society is. And unfortunately, that is not acceptable as a movement. We know for a fact where Marxism leads. We have seen this in countless countries, how this works. It doesn't end well. You want to talk about it? Let's talk about Mao. Let's talk about the Soviet Union. Let's talk about North Korea. Let's talk about Cuba. We can go on and on about how Marxist leads to communism and how all of this winds up in a very, very bad place. Unfortunately, we keep going back to this because we keep thinking that everyone else did it wrong and somehow someone else is going to get it right, but it never works that way. The concept of everyone sharing and everything going well, it's a great concept, but we're humans and honestly, we suck. We're not going to get any better at this. We have to do with what we have, and what we have right now is a pretty darn good capitalist system. Now, it has its flaws. Of course, nothing's perfect. But if we keep trying to go back to the system that we know is fundamentally broken from the start in comparison to a system that works very well and has some negative things that can change because you need better people. Here's the problem. We don't want to change. We want to change the system instead of fixing the root of the problem. The root of the problem is people's hearts. People's hearts are where the problem is. Excuse me. Their hearts keep going back to greed, keep going back to hate. And that's where all of this always stems from. And this always stems from the fact that we need Jesus. Now, let's take this also back to one other thing about how they fundamentally want to change things. They work very closely with a woman named Nikole Hannah-Jones. She made something called the 1619 Project. The 1619 Project is now starting to be taught in some schools, and it has been touted by the New York Times as a very good history piece, and this is definitive history. Unfortunately, it's a very skewed version of history. The skewed version of history is that nothing good in America, period, end of sentence, has ever happened except for because of slaves. Which, that is not true. There are so many good Black success stories. And there's a lot of bad stuff too that happened because of slaves. We're not denying that at all. But you can't say that everything good only comes from one terrible thing. And this woman, Nikole Hannah-Jones, also said that she purposely left out African American success stories because she did not want to give quote-unquote white people the way out. Yes, you can look the video up if you want to. She very clearly said that. And she even said, yes, I'm a trained Marxist. That type of thinking is only going to take our country to a deep, dark place of hate. And we're already in a very precarious zone. We're close to a civil war, if we want to be honest. But we keep coming back to this idea of revolution and change. But the revolution and change we need is not one that is going to be solved by fire. It's going to be solved by removing the fuel from the fire. We need to change our hearts, and that's the only way to do that. Now, who's using this? Let's say, whenever anything's moving, always take a step back and say, who's using this movement? Who's doing something with this? I can tell you who's using it. Right now, number one, we're talking about this from a Christian perspective. I am a Christian, and this is where I'm going to take my viewpoint from. The Christian perspective is Satan is using this. How is he using it? He wants to divide. Everything that's happening is causing division. If you go back to the 1950s, there's a playbook that talks about how the communists can take over our country, but not via a armed revolution. The reason they knew that couldn't happen is because there's too many guns in America, let's be honest. Now, they said, how do we do this? We break apart every societal norm, starting with the family. So what happens? Divorce rates have gone up tremendously. Now, if you want to take that into the African American community, it's even worse. All these things have gone worse and worse and worse over the years. The homeless, homes without a father in it have gone up tremendously. All these things. And there is no sense of unity and family. There's no sense of country, because now we're being taught to hate our country instead of being taught to try to fix things. It's just hating and it's not fixing. Hate does not fix, period. So you have that, and you have the thought process of, well, if I'm gonna change a country, I have to break everything down. Go back to where it started. The founding fathers had their flaws. But if you look at the document that they wrote in the Declaration of Independence, it is a beautiful document. But we don't even want to take the time to do that, because look who they are. Yes, they have messed up. No one is perfect. We are going to mess up. We are going to be bad people sometimes. But what is the end result of what we do? Are we people who mess up sometimes and then we're striving for good all the time? Or are we people who mess up all the time and are sometimes we do something good? Because that's what this revolution right now that's currently going on is trying to do. Trying to take all this bad and all this, there's been murder, there's been looting, the whole thing with Chaz that got started, and which changed the CHOP. If you don't know what it is, I encourage you to look up. It was a very interesting thing, a very interesting failed experiment. That started, and there's murder, there's rape, there's looting, there's all these different things, and you're trying to bring something good out of it. You can't do that. You cannot say, I'm going to use all this bad and somehow bring good. That's not how it works. Sometimes things happen in the way, well, look at what America did. There are bad things that America did do. Yes. But what was it? What is its goal? It was striving to become a melting pot and freedom for nations. You want to take it back to the Pilgrims? They only wanted freedom just to be able to worship. And then it grew and grew, and then more and more things happened. There's a lot of moving parts. But it wasn't just a movement of hatred. It wasn't just visceral anger, left, right, and sideways. That's what we need to move away from. We have to move more towards love and away from this anger. Now, let's talk about it. So now we know that how Satan's using things. Let's talk about how the government's using things. If you want to look at the past 10 to 15 years, look how much the government has taken power in the past 10 to 15 years. Every time that there is some form of a tragedy or unrest or whatever, more laws are getting created, more things happening. You want to look at a current example of that. Look at Governor Whitmer. Right now, what she is doing is making all these laws, and then her own husband is violating those laws. Guess why? Because people in power don't really care most of the time about the laws unless they are good people. How do you know who's a good person? This is going to be real controversial, do they follow Christ? Can you be a good person and not follow Christ? Yes. But what is the mark of a Christian? The mark of a Christian is your heart and how you move forward day to day. And if you can't do that, and you say, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm going to do X, Y, and Z all the time, which is the example? Are you 100%? Are you good 80% of the time? Not saying that your actions, but your heart, because your actions are going to follow your heart. Your actions are not going to make your heart, but your heart's going to make your actions. You want to talk about that? That's Paul. You can look that up in Romans. That is a very good place to start. But Governor Whitmer, she took all of this power and then did not follow it herself. Now go back to Congress. They're doing the same thing. What happened with the Affordable Care Act? They exempted themselves from the Affordable Care Act, but they said it's good enough for Americans. Does that make any sense? Every time people are given power, it starts to make things worse. The purpose of the Constitution was to take power away from the government and give it to the people, but make sure that there were people in charge to be able to govern the safety of freedom. That freedom is not the freedom from everything. Like, oh, I'm free to do, and I'm free from everything. No, it's freedom to do whatever you want, but you're also free to deal with your own consequences. You're free to deal with your own consequences. That is something no one wants to deal with. They want to have freedom to do everything and have freedom to have no consequences. It doesn't work that way. You cannot have the two together. If you're free, you're going to have consequences. Whether they're good, whether they're bad, the choice is up to you. So now let's think of what a Christian should do during these times. A Christian during these times, some people say, well, they need to stand up for the oppressed. Yes, stand up for the oppressed. But you can't stand with a movement that is rooted in hatred and in a lie. It doesn't work that way. You can stand with truth. So, do I stand with Black lives? You bet I do. Black lives do matter. Do I agree with the movement? Absolutely not. And I will never agree with it, because look at what they say and look at their actions. How can I stand next to that and then you're going to look at me and say, well, you do stand for that because you stood with them while they were looting. That's why I can't stand with them. Because I can't stand with people who are going to do X, Y, or Z. I will fight and do whatever I can in the best way possible. I will support anyone. If I see injustice, I am going to say something about it. If I can do something about it, if I have a way to vote in some way about this, I will do that. I will do anything that I can. But I will not stand with people who are going to attack everything that is good and right and then claim that they are trying to change things for the better. That's not right. It doesn't work. So as Christians, we need to stand for truth and stand for love. Our problem as Christians is we don't understand love. We don't understand what it means to actually work with someone. That actually means to fight with someone, because that means you're with them in the trenches, and it also means you're going to see them mess up and you're going to love them through it, and you're also going to be there, and they might even harm you. And guess what? I was listening to a radio show, and this one thing struck me profoundly that the radio host said. He said, people are tearing down all these statues. Abraham Lincoln was torn down. I don't understand that one for the life of me. Yeah. Anyway, they're tearing down statues, and there's angry mobs going everywhere. So how are we going to fix this? How are we going to get some rest in this country? He said, why don't we have people standing around statues when people are rioting, looting? And he goes, this is going to be the hardest thing in the world. Stand around holding hands, not doing anything. People are going to come up and they're going to beat you in the head. They're going to knock you out. But you don't fight back. And guess what? That's what's going to change. Because whenever someone sees someone else being oppressed and they're not fighting back, they're just going to say, I love you. Guess what? People are going to start noticing, hey, what are we doing? Because right now, there's everyone who is going along with this movement and don't know the roots of the movement. They're being used to push an agenda. And unfortunately, that is where we have to draw the line of sand. Look at where the roots are, where our cause is. Our cause is for truth and justice, not for for separation and hatred. So we have to stop and look at where the root is and follow the one who told us where to go. Every day, we need to follow Christ. Now, we're going to do a little something, and this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to read 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5. But understand this, that in the last days, perilous times and great stress and trouble will abound. People will be lovers of self and self-centered, and love money, and be aroused by an inordinate and greedy desire, proud and arrogant, contemptuous, boisterous. They will be abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, and profane, without natural affection, relentless, slanderers, troublemakers, imperatant, and loose in morals, in conduct, and uncontrolled, fierce haters of good, treacherous, betrayers, rash, and will be lovers of sensual pleasures and vain amusements, more and rather than lovers of God. For they hold a form of piety. This is what I really want you to pay attention. A form of piety, meaning they're going to be hold a form of righteousness, like we're doing good, and reject form of piety, and deny and reject, and are strangers to the power. I'm paraphrasing, power of God. And then next it says, avoid such people. Avoid such people. We are not in this world. We are in this world, but we are not of it. We are going to do things in this world because we're humans. We all have to do some of the same things. But that company, who do you hold in your company? And one thing I've learned from when I was a child, and when I used to teach children, show me your 5 best friends when they're young. I'll show you your future. Who your company is matters incredibly so. Because look at right now, any presidential candidate that comes out, what do? Who's he hanging around? Because they want to know Who's going to do what? How are they going to act? What company do they keep? What company do you keep? What company do you say is worthy of your time, worthy of your effort to fight with? Now, no one is perfect. There's going to be messed up situations. And sometimes, because we're in a fallen world, we're going to have to pick the lesser of two evils. We're in a fallen world. But where are we constantly standing with? Are we going to stand with righteousness and do the right thing and fight for the oppressed, but do it in the correct way? Or are we going to be deceived by what the devil is doing right now and using all these different movements that have absolutely nothing to do with true change and righteousness? What are we going to do? So that's what I have for you guys today. So I just want to thank you all for joining me on the first edition of The Crow's Call. And I would like to see you guys next time. And please don't forget to like and share. And check us out on www.whosoevergroup.com. Thank you very much.